Terry, can you hear me? Okay, thanks. Good morning, everyone. We're just waiting for one panel member, and once she arrives, we will be ready to go. Madam Coordinator, can you give Ms. Chandler a call?
Yes, I can.
Thank you. We're just waiting for panel member Chandler to arrive before we begin. There she is.
I apologize. Sorry about that.
That's okay. Good morning and welcome to this online hearing of the Committee of Adjustment of the City of Ottawa under the Planning Act. This video conference is also live streaming on YouTube. With me are my fellow panel members, Jocelyn Chandler, Stephen Lewis, Terrence Otto, and Martin Vervoort. My name is Fabien Poulin and I will be chairing this hearing today. The procedure for this hearing will be as follows. Listed on the agenda and appearing on the screen are the applications we will hear today. For the sake of efficiency, the committee may deal with the agenda items in a different order. Committee members have reviewed the planning reports and any written submissions in support or in opposition of each of the applications. Today, we will hear oral submissions from any interested parties. I've been asked to provide a notice regarding minor variance applications. Notwithstanding pre-consultation with city staff, it is the responsibility of the applicant to identify all required variances accurately on the application to either add a new variance or increase the extent of the variance requested. This must be given in accordance with the Planning Act and may require the application to be recirculated for the next hearing date at a cost to the applicant at the prescribed fee. If an applicant amends their plans with no impact to the variances or to reduce the variances requested, recirculation may not be required. As part of the statutory public notification requirements, each applicant was required to post a sign on the property and file a statutory declaration confirming the sign posting. This declaration must be on file today before we can hear the application. Without it, I may have to adjourn the application or administer an oath if necessary. Can the coordinator confirm that we have received all statutory declarations?
Mr. Chair, we have not received any signed statutory declarations.
Thank you. I will administer the oath to all applicants. The committee may ask for a brief presentation of the application, followed by questions from members and submissions from the public. Please address your comments to the chair, starting with your name and spelling it if necessary, and your municipal address for the record. The committee limits presentations to 5 minutes, and any exceptions will be at the chair's discretion. Before we begin, we have 2 items of business to address. Does any member present need to declare an interest in any of the applications that are before us or that are on the agenda of another committee panel? Any declarations of interest? There are no declarations of interest. We also have to adopt the minutes of the last public hearings, the public hearings of May 5th and May 9th. I'd like to ask the panel members to approve the adoption of the May 5th minutes. All in favor, please raise your hands. May 5th minutes are adopted. Now we have the minutes of May 19th. All those in favor of accepting those minutes, please raise your hands. Those minutes have been adopted as well. We will now hear the application schedules for this hearing, and we'll deal firstly with any items that may be adjourned. Is there anyone present who wishes to address to request an adjournment of one of the applications scheduled for this hearing? I believe we have 4 requests. First one is having to do with 7110 Gallagher Road. Mr. Brooks, are you available? I see, there he is. Mr. Brooks, are you available? He was here. There, I see a Gail Brooks, but they're muted. Would you please unmute yourself? There you go. Good morning.
Hello,
Hi, you're on.
I'm on.
Yeah,
Good
we
morning.
got you.
Good, thank you. Good morning, Mr. Chair and members. We will be asking for a deferral. However, I'd like to read into the minutes a comment with your permission.
Please go ahead.
As agent for RBJ Developments, Inc., my comments are as follows. I would like to briefly draw your attention to a Rideau Township Committee and Council approval of, and I quote, Project 93-011-02, Lot 11, Concession 3 approval on August 16th, 1993 for development on the recommendation of Cheryl McWilliams, Rideau Township Planner. That project, Lot 11, Concession 3, is what is before you today. My point is that with no objection from the regional municipality of Ottawa-Carleton back in 1993, development along Gallagher Road was expected and legislatively approved and has taken place and is taking place. Negotiations for the present application for the 2 severances before you began on January the 6th with the city and with Eric Lalande, RVCA planner. There does, and I quote, there does not appear to be any natural hazards or natural heritage components that the RVCA regulate along Gallagher Road. In the file before you is a summary of all the meetings of emails concerning the 7 applications. And those emails started in January the 6th. We are now 5.5 months later, and we're now doing a presentation. As you can see, the series of emails commenced with the city. Actually, it's on January the 6th in 2021. And I thought ended on May the 28th, 2021, with receiving the following quote. This email is to acknowledge that your applications have been reviewed and deemed complete and are scheduled to be heard on Wednesday, June the 16th of this year. However, 7 days later, on June the 4th, the following email was received. The planning department cannot process your application and provide a professional opinion until an EIS is provided. I responded to that email back to the city simply saying it's an impossibility to get an EIS for this meeting before you today. I also pointed out that for 5.5 months of emails going back and forth with city planners and myself, there was at no time any mention of an EIS that had to be filed with the application. So that's where we're at. In the meantime, I have a consultant now has been retained to carry out the EIS study and have a report ready for September the 30th, 2021. And these consultants, as you are well aware, are extremely busy at this point in time and could not get one to do the EIS study for June, July, and August. So therefore, we are asking for a deferral until September the 30th, 2021, or perhaps sooner, depending upon the consultant's workload, and thus the removal of the earlier sine die request. And further, that no monetary penalty be assessed. So we spent 5.5 months working with the township and the RVCA, or with the city, I'm sorry, the old days coming back, with the city, and on June the 4th to receive this email, the planning department cannot process your application and provide a professional opinions. I think we should have been notified much sooner.
Thank you, Mr. Brooks. So what I'd like to do is ask the planner, Mr. Harrigan. We have 2 dates in October after the date September 30th. That's October 6th and October 20th. Are you able to review the EIS and resolve any concerns you have with the applicant on or before those 2 dates of our next hearing after September 30th?
Through you, Mr. Chair, that would be a little difficult to achieve if the EIS is provided to us on September 30th. It usually takes a minimum of 2 weeks to review and assess it, and that is if there is no revisions or corrections that need to be made. And given the severity of environmental constraints on the property, such as the provincially significant wetlands, potential significant habitats, and the significant woodlands on there, it may come back as a complicated EIS. So ideally, if they would like to avoid the sine die, which that is our preference, is to have it sine die, we would say November is the earliest.
Can you just respond to Mr. Brooks's comments about the previous, or maybe I should ask them, the conservation partners, if that previous report that was cited by Mr. Brooks is valid and that there were no concerns at the time about any of those items you just described. Mr. Is there somebody from the the conservation partners available to comment on that? Can you then comment, Mr. Harrigan? Have you reviewed that document?
We have not. We are, the planning department is not allowed to comment on any other department within or outside of our organization.
Fair enough. Okay. So, Mr. Brooks, what would you like to do? Would you like to adjourn it to the 6th or the 20th of October? Go ahead, Mr. Brooks.
We actually, I didn't print it out, but we did receive from Cheryl Williams that all the agencies, including the Mississippi Conservation Authority, had no problems. The Mississippi Authority, from my discussions with Eric Lalande, RVCA planner, is fully aware that we have a significant wetland about 300 to 400 meters back from Gallagher Road.
Mr. Brooks, I'm just going to interrupt you 1 second. All I'm looking for is a date that you'd be happy with. And the 6th of the 20th, the planning department said it's going to be difficult to review it if they've got any questions or concerns in that time frame. Are you happy with the November date instead of going sine die?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Madam Coordinator, what's the next dates available in November?
Mr. Chair, I can answer that. It would be the November 3rd is the first hearing, and November 17th would be the second.
Okay, so we have those two dates. Mr. Harrigan, are you able to accomplish the review of that EIS by the 3rd of November?
If the EIS is provided to us September 30th, we should be able to achieve that, provided there are no complications with the EIS. Otherwise, we may seek another adjournment.
Okay, thank you very much. You okay with that, Mr. Brooks? Instead of going sine die, we'll go for the first meeting in November?
Yeah,
I didn't hear you. You
yes,
agree?
that
Okay,
would be
perfect.
fine.
All right,
Uh,
thank you. So what I'd like to propose,
further,
go ahead, Mr. Brooks.
Mr. Chair, the request was that no monetary penalty be assessed. I want to be very clear about that.
No monetary
For the November.
penalty will be assessed. Is that correct, Mr. Deputy Secretary? For an adjournment?
Mr. Chair, where the adjournment is to a specific date and there's no requirement for recirculation, as I believe is proposed here, there is no fee that's required.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
You're welcome. So I'd like to propose then that the application be adjourned to the first meeting in November. All those in favor, please raise your hands. Thank you. Your application is adjourned till the first meeting in November, and I just don't remember what that date that is, but we'll have that sent to you anyway. Thank you very much, Mr. Brooks.
Thank you.
Now we'll move on to the second item. That is having to do with 2-269 Pinneys Point Road. Mr. Bays, are you available?
Nope.
Hello, Mr. Bays. I see that.
Good day,
you're
Mr.
on.
Chair.
Good morning. Good morning, sir. Are you looking for an adjournment today?
I mean, I personally, Mr. Chair, I'm not seeking an adjournment, and I would request one of two items. Of course, I need to defer to the committee's wisdom and opinion on this. My first would be a request that the committee may consider this application, recognizing that there is an ability to place a condition. At this time, there was a circulation out to various bodies and review by city staff. And what they noted is that there were some comments on the geotechnical and slope stability for this site. There has been a draft condition forwarded by city staff, by committee staff that note that the completion of a satisfactory geotechnical report is a requirement or to be a requirement of approval, and my client would be willing to accept that approach if the committee felt that was acceptable.
Well, right now we're just addressing whether or not you would like to have an adjournment. So if you'd like to have an adjournment, we can deal with that. Otherwise, we can put it on the agenda and go through it and see what happens with the application today.
If the committee is acceptable or amenable to that, I'd appreciate the opportunity.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Harrigan, do you have any comments about the adjournment request?
Mr. Chair, I can answer that question.
Okay.
The reason for seeking the adjournment request is that a slope stability assessment was provided, but it found that the slopes were stable on the predication that that there's bedrock, but no information on the condition of that bedrock was provided. So if conditions are found to be unfavorable, it could result in the building having to be moved, which would cause complications for the other variances sought.
Okay. The panel, I'd like to ask the panel if they have any comments with respect to this adjournment. Ms. Chandler?
I do have a question, but I'd like to hear from Mississippi Valley, if you don't mind first.
Sure. Conservation Partners, are you available to just comment on this adjournment request and the slope stability?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. It is also the Conservation Authority's request to have an adjournment of the application. The slope stability report does not adequately address the proposed location of the dwelling and the requested variances. So it is our request to have the application adjourned until such time as the geotechnical report has been updated to support the proposed variances or address the proposed variances.
Thank you, Ms. Alkin. Mr. Lewis, any comments?
Question is, how long would it take to do that slope stability thing, study?
Through the chair, if I can address that question. So our client and the geotechnical engineer, which is Gemtech, were actually out on the site yesterday to do the testing that Mr. Gordon referenced. They're hoping to get a geotechnical report in short order. As the previous applicant noted, many people are very busy at this time, but we're targeting within the next 2 weeks for a letter that would be supplemental to the previous slope stability and geotechnical.
Okay, with that, I think I would support an adjournment for the simple reason you're not going to save any time if it can be done within the next month. It's not going to probably make any difference, but you do run the risk of having to do this all over again if the variances aren't met. Those are my comments.
Thank you. Mr. Otto?
I agree with Mr. Lewis. I think we should adjourn.
Thank you. Mr. Vervoort?
I agree. I think the other issue too is we don't usually condition minor variances, and there could be other variances that are required. I don't have an issue with the application itself, assuming the geotechnical report is fine. So I recommend we probably adjourn it a month if it's going to take a week or two to get the report, and then bring it back on for maybe the second meeting in July.
Thank you. Ms. Chandler, any further comments?
No, I agree with everybody else.
Thank you. So to that end, Mr. Bays, would you still like to proceed, or would you like to adjourn till?
No, in that case, Mr. Chair, I'm comfortable and my client's comfortable with adjourning. I do recognize Mr. Gordon's report recommended adjournment sine die. Based on the current information I have on when we expect to receive that additional geotechnical information, I would like to request that this be rescheduled either to I believe it's the 14th or the 28th of July.
7th or the 21st?
7th or 21st. Thank you.
Okay. So to that end, I'd like to ask the panel if they'd like to adjourn this to the first meeting in July, and that is of July the 7th. Is that enough time then for Mr. Gordon to get to his review completed? Mr. Gordon?
I think we would be more comfortable with the second meeting, Mr. Chair.
Of the 14th? Okay. So I'd like to propose then that we move forward to adjourn this application to the 14th of July. All those in favor, please raise your hands.
Mr. Chair, I think it's the 21st, eh?
It's the 1st and the 3rd, isn't it?
5 weeks.
Sorry.
First Wednesday in July is the 7th,
Yeah,
and the 3rd Wednesday is the 21st.
yeah.
So it's either the 7th or the 21st. So we're looking at the 21st of July to adjourn this. All those in favor, please raise your hands. Application is adjourned to the 21st of July. Mr. Bays, thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Still on adjournments, we're on item number 6, having to do with 4639 Donnelly Drive. Mr. Shipman, and it has to do with also item number 7. Mr. Shipman, are you available? Good morning, Mr. Shipman. You're muted and I don't see you.
Yeah, I don't know. Oh, here's the
There
video.
we go. Perfect. There you are. Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Shipman, are you in agreement with having these two applications adjourned?
Mr. Chair, we would like to proceed. We feel that the concerns can be appropriately addressed through conditions. Similar to the first application, we initially did some pre-consultation on these applications as far back as 2017, late 2017, winter of 2017, for various reasons, delays with the applicant, delays with the applicant's agent. We haven't brought it back. We prepared an EIS, brought it forward. At that time, our initial pre-consultation, we basically had agreement that we could deal with the concerns in respect to unstable slopes by way of development agreement, both with the RVCA and with planning staff. Recently, last week, we received feedback again on the file, which brought forward some concern in relation to adjacent lands and potential unregulated landfilling operations, which we don't believe are there. We're not allowed or provided with any information in that respect. We've reviewed the available imagery in great detail, and ourselves can't see any indication of filling. But regardless, we believe that such concerns, as initially with the unstable slopes, can be addressed with preferably vis-a-vis a development agreement. In the most recent response, it was staff preferred a holding zone, rezoning of the retained parcel to a holding designation. Either way, we believe it can be appropriate to address through such conditions.
Okay. I'd like to ask Mr. Gordon if he could provide us with more information on his request for adjournment here.
Yes, through you, Mr. Chair. There are two reasons that we're seeking an adjournment here. One is the potentially unstable slopes, for which we don't have a report on. And the second is that in the most recent review, it was noted that there's a former landfill site, and it was not a municipal site. So the reason we can't provide information is that the city does not have that information. The applicant has been advised that they would need to provide a risk assessment as per the policies in the official plan to prove that that the severed site would be safe. And it was mentioned that a holding zone is an option. Planning doesn't prefer that because there is a potential that we are creating a undevelopable parcel here if those issues cannot be resolved.
Thank you, Mr. Gordon. I'd like to ask our conservation partners to describe the reason for their requested adjournment of this application. Conservation partners? Is there anyone here from conservation to address this application?
Mr. Chair, I don't believe conservation objected to it. I don't believe they had concerns.
Oh, my apologies. I see that it's the previous adjournment. Thank you very much, Mr. Revort. Yes, they did not. Okay, I'd like to ask the panel then for any comments they may have. Mr. Otto?
I guess it's up to the applicant if they want to proceed, they can. And I guess we'll leave it at that.
Okay. Mr. Lewis, any comments?
Yeah, I'm willing to proceed with the application. One question, this so-called or dump site or whatever that we have no information on, is it on the same property or a neighboring property?
Through you, Mr. Chair, it is a neighboring property. It's across from the former Birch Rapids Correctional Facility. We don't believe it is a landfill. Any landfill operations ever occurred there. A detailed review of the aerial imagery does indicate perhaps some quarrying operations there, which fall outside of the official plan requirements for risk assessment, that type of thing. So in short answer to your question, it's across the road and 12 meters below.
Okay, I'm willing to hear it, but it's going to be pretty hard to do, especially if your neighbor or whoever owns that doesn't want you on the property. I don't know how you're going to do it. Anyway, I'm willing to hear it.
Mr. Vervoort, any comments?
I have some concerns that the retained parcel will be undevelopable. So I'm in favor of adjourning it and getting that. I think the slope stability issue can be dealt with by a building envelope, but I'm not sure about the other study that's required for the previously existing landfill. So I'd be in favor of adjourning it until we have that risk assessment.
Thank you, Mr. Vervoort. Ms. Chandler?
I agree with Mr. Vervoort. Even if what came out of an adjournment was the identification of a development envelope that the city was comfortable with, and perhaps by doing so, there would be a way to avoid some of those more onerous assessments, like on the landfill site. It's not clear to me based on the application where this future development envelope would be. So I do have a preference to get it a little bit more clear through an adjournment.
Thank you. I too would like to have a little more clarity on the slope stability. So to that end, I'd support an adjournment as well. To that end, I'd like to ask, yes, go ahead. Who's that?
Yes, just a couple more comments that perhaps not clear. There is no plan to develop the retained parcel, which is why we're willing to put a holding zone on it, preconditioning such studies as a condition of any development of the site. The retained parcel is enormous. It's in excess of 33 hectares. More than 50% of the retained parcel would lie well outside of any influence zone of any potential landfill site on the concerned parcel across the road. It also lies some 12 to 15 meters below any potential building envelope on the site, which further mitigates any risk that's there. And I would repeat, we don't believe there is any landfill. I've got some imagery that's showing the small area of disturbance, which pretty clearly identifies it as simply a quarrying operation, both from street view and the overhead. We believe that any requirement to provide such a risk assessment would basically kill the application. It's tantamount to just turning us down. I don't feel there's any way we're going to get through the province and get access to the property and get on there to do whatever, who knows what, to do a study there. The image you're looking at now is from the street of that area of disturbance. This image that you're looking at now, the circled area is the area of disturbance. The arrow indicates the position from which the other picture is taken. The red outlined area is the proposed severance, and of course there's 90 acres of land behind that, which is all now solar farm. The purpose of this application is simply to separate the residential use from the solar farm use, leaving the solar farm as a unto its own. There's a long-term lease on that, 20 years out. There's going to be no development of that parcel for residential purposes. As such, I think a holding zone on there, recognizing that it's a great deal of additional cost to the landowner, both to put it on and to remove it, is an appropriate way of dealing with the retained parcel. Again, given that there's no development proposed now or in the future for this parcel, and given that if it were at some point in the future to be done, we have vast areas beyond any influence zone from this potential landfill that could be developed without even entering into the question of this landfill. Final mention, you can see from the contouring there that we have 12 to 15 meters of drop from the top of that quarry area to our site. So we're way above it. it just seems, beyond the pale to put us to this risk assessment study. I believe it would be tantamount to probably declining the application altogether, because I just don't think we'd be able to get on there and do any sort of study, given that it's some provincial government services or something like that.
Okay. Any further comments from the panel? So now I'd like to ask
Mr. Chair, I think I'd be prepared to go ahead if the applicant is willing to put a holding zone on the property, because I think that addresses the concern. And if they ever do want to develop it later, then they would have to continue the process. So that might be, I think that would address a lot of the concerns. So sort of change my position on it after hearing that.
Fair enough. Okay. So to that end, I'd like to ask the panel if they'd like to adjourn this application to July 21st, instead of going sine die. All those in favor of adjourning the application to July 21st, please raise your hands. All those want to hear the application today, please raise your hands. We will hear the application today, Mr. Shipman.
Thank you.
Thank you. Now we'll do the items in order. We'll move on to application number 3, having to do with 3674 Armitage Avenue. Is Margaret Kellaway available? I see your name. You need to unmute yourself and and have your video camera working, please.
Good morning. Hi.
Good morning. How are you this morning?
Great, thank you. We just had a really quick blip, which had me frightened I would miss you altogether. My name is Margaret Kellaway, and my husband and I are the owners of 3674 Armitage Avenue.
Thank you very much. I need to administer an oath for the sign posting on your property. Can you take that oath today?
Certainly.
Do you solemnly swear or affirm that the notice provided by the committee was posted at the property to which the application applies for the prescribed number of days before the hearing as instructed and was clearly visible and legible during that time? Do you swear?
I do so swear.
Great. Please provide a brief description of your application today.
Okay. We have a property at 3674 Armitage Avenue, and we are wanting to remove the cottage or tear it down and build a new home on the property. But before I get more into that, I have been in discussion with Mr. Gordon at the City Planning Office, and I would like to make some minor changes to the variance requests.
Okay.
First of all, for variance B, it's changing it to read to permit a reduced setback from the normal high water mark from the watercourse east of the property of 10.2 meters, whereas the bylaw requires a greater of 30 meters from the normal high water mark or 15 meters from the top of bank. And for variance D, it's to permit a reduced setback of 7.1 meters from the septic system to the normal high water mark from the watercourse to the east of the property, whereas the bylaw requires a greater of 30 meters from the normal high water mark or 15 meters from the top of bank. And this has only come about, the position hasn't changed, the plan hasn't changed, it's only that we were able to determine a high water mark on that watercourse.
Okay, and you're asking for a reduced variance in any event?
Yes, on both those cases, yeah.
Great, okay. Okay, please proceed.
Okay. As I said, we want to remove the existing cottage and build a permanent home on the property. The existing cottage also has a very old septic bed between the cottage and the river. So that will be going as well. The septic is going to be moved to a location well out of the floodplain at the back of the property. So that's a really big plus, I feel, on this proposal. As well, the house is being moved farther from the Ottawa River. So you've seen all the documents, I'm sure, in the letter that we sent with all of our reasoning. We just wanted to show you today a very simple plan without all the busyness and lines of the site plan of what we want to do. So the existing cottage is in red, and in the little corner there, between the house and the river is where the current septic system is. So environmentally, it's not something that we really want to keep that way. We want to move it and put it into a better area. So we're removing the cottage, and we'll be building farther back in the floodplain away from the Ottawa River, a house with a attached garage and a deck. We are trying to maintain the distance to the water course on the east. And as well as you can see, the proposed septic is going to be well back. It will be actually completely out of the floodplain. We feel that the water course to the east is going to be provided a margin of safety from hazards from flooding and unstable slopes, and protected by the environmental quality, because there's an actual ridge that runs along our property line that separates our property from the water course. So nothing will be able to flow down from there. And as well, the next picture shows the fact that the water course now is completely dry, which is its normal state. And the picture on the left is at the corner of our property, and the other one is up at Torwood Drive, which is where the water course begins. Thank you for your consideration, and we're happy to answer any questions that you have.
Thank you, Ms. Kellaway. Mr. Gordon, can you make some comments on behalf of the city?
Yes, through you, Mr. Chair. We agree with what the applicant stated about changing the variances. There were no changes to the plans. It's just the way the bylaw is written is back from normal high water mark or 15 meters from top of bank. In this case, it is the normal high water mark setback that's greater. So the wording just needed to be changed. We would further like to request that variance A be removed. And that variance currently states to permit development within the flood overlay, whereas the bylaw states that development within the flood overlay is prohibited. Our reason for requesting this be removed is that there are subsections within that section of
Seems we've lost Mr. Gordon. Mr. Gordon, we're not able to hear you. You're frozen screen.
bylaw that exempt and
Mr. Gordon, you're going to have to repeat the reason for Mr. Gordon.
Through you, Mr. Chair, if you could let me know where I dropped off.
Yeah, you dropped off where you were discussing the removal of variance A.
Okay. So planning would like to request the removal of variance A because the bylaw that prohibits development within the floodplain includes exemptions for Armitage Avenue. So it's our opinion that this request is not required, and further it would create a perception that you can seek a minor variance to permit development within the floodplain, which would not be a desirable effect.
Thank you, Mr. Gordon. I'd now like to ask the conservation partners for any comments they have about this application.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. We would echo similar comments to the city with regards to variance A. We request that it be removed from the application. It is our opinion it is not necessary to permit development on the property, given that Armitage Avenue is an area with special zoning provisions for the floodplain, given that a 2-zone floodplain has been approved. So in terms of the requested variances for setbacks from the Ottawa River and the adjacent water course, the Conservation Authority is satisfied that the proposed new dwelling will be appropriately set back from both features. So we have no concerns with the approval of variances B, C, and D. but we ask that variance A be removed from the application for similar concerns about the understanding that a variance could be granted for development floodplain, where in this case it is not necessary for development to proceed on the property.
Thank you very much. I'd like to ask the panel for any comments, questions, or concerns they have. Ms. Chandler?
I agree with the removal of variance A. I would like confirmation that the Ottawa Septic System Office has had a look at the setback between the sewage system and the water course down the side, and that's approvable under Part 8.
Ms. Ogden?
Through you, Mr. Chair, yes, the Ottawa Septic System has no objections to the location of the septic system.
Okay. And finally, I would like it noted for the record that although there is discussion in the applicant's submission regarding the gazebo on the property, that no part of this will provide any relief, like any agreement or acceptance with respect to the gazebo.
Okay. Mr. Otto, any questions or comments?
No, I'm fine, thank you.
Mr. Lewis?
Support.
Mr. Vervoort?
I agree with the removal of variance A. I don't think it's required. And I think the amendments to the application are minor enough that it doesn't require recirculation, and I'm in favor of the application.
Thank you very much. To that end, I'd like to ask the panel to approve this application. All those in favor, please raise your hands. Application is approved, Mr. and Mrs. Callaway. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Welcome. Now we'll move on to application number 4, having to do with 1048 Boucher Crescent. And Ms. Steele, are you available? Michelle Steele. Ms. Steele, are you available? I see your name there. You need to unmute yourself and turn on your camera.
Oh, mute myself. Unmute. Mute.
You're good. You're good. You're
Oh, there I
unmuted.
am. Hi there.
Yep. Hi there. I need to administer an oath concerning the sign posting on your property. Can you take that oath today?
Absolutely.
You solemnly swear or affirm that the notice provided by the committee was posted at the property to which the application applies for the prescribed number of days before the hearing, as instructed, and was clearly visible and legible during that time. Do you swear?
I swear.
Thank you very much. Would you please proceed and provide us with a brief description of your application today?
Mr. Chair, I'm very sorry to interrupt, but I'm just wondering if you should address the issue as to whether or not recirculation is required first.
Good point. I did have that as a note and I just forgotten it. So you're making some variances, some changes to your variances here, and the discussion we were having was whether or not these are material enough, especially the extra variance where item C, or variance number C, where it wasn't presented on the circulation. And given that, it would likely, it does require recirculation for the extra variance. And so I would suggest that this particular application needs to be recirculated to the public so that they are on a complete understanding of what the total application is. Any further comments, Ms. Steele, about that?
No.
Okay. Can I ask then if there are any comments from the committee? Mr. Lewis?
Actually, I have no problem with the application. I'm good to hear it today.
Okay. Mr. Vervoort?
I don't have any problems with the application, but I think because, and I don't have any problems with the amendments to variances A and B, but my concern is that variance D is a new amendment or a new addition that wasn't previously circulated. So in my opinion, the application needs to be recirculated to give proper notice under the Planning Act.
Mr. Otto?
Yes, I think unfortunately we have to have it recirculated.
Thank you. Ms. Chandler? You're muted, Ms. Chandler. Go ahead.
I'm in agreement.
In agreement with
Mr.
what?
Vervoort, sorry,
Okay.
I think it needs to be recirculated, unfortunately.
Okay, thank you. I agree. I think it needs to be recirculated. The public needs to know exactly what this application's about, and it would be unfair to proceed without doing that. So to that end, I'm going to ask the panel to approve having this application recirculated, and we can hear it at the next available time. All in favor of having this recirculated, please raise your hands. Thank you, Ms. Steele. Sorry about that, but we need to get it recirculated. Thank you.
When will it be heard, Mr. Chair? Any idea?
Mr. Secretary Treasurer, I believe it has to be recirculated and there's time limits involved.
That's correct, Mr. Chair. Thank you. If the check for the recirculation fee can be submitted within the next week or so, hopefully we could accommodate the application on July 21st. The intake period for the first hearing in July is closed at this point.
Thank you. Is that okay, Mr. Lewis?
Well, just the recirculation fee. Did the city come up with the idea it needed to be recirculated? I'm not sure it's fair to charge a fee to the applicant here now on top of all this. What's the thoughts, Mr. Deputy Secretary Treasurer? Well, how much is the fee?
For you, Mr. Chair, the recirculation fee, which is the committee's cost recovery fee for just the mail out essentially and the staff time involved, is $662.
Can we not send the bill to the planning department?
Because?
Well, is it not their idea that we have to do this extra variance?
Was it not their idea probably that they did not give the correct number of variances? Did not recognize that this was required? Is that what you mean?
Yeah, it should have went out with the original set. Anyway.
So do you want to make that motion that we waive the fee and this because it would have been planning, or can we waive the fee, Mr. Deputy Secretary?
Mr. Chair, yes, enforcement of fees, the committee itself does have the discretion to waive where it deems that appropriate.
Okay. Mr. Gordon, was this something that was missed at the planning department, this particular extra variance?
Through you, Mr. Chair, this is Mr. Harrigan's application.
Okay, I have your name here. Sorry.
Through you, Mr. Chair, I can answer that. The missed minor variance is the applicant's responsibility and sole responsibility to correctly identify all of the correct minor variances required. It was actually the planning department who caught that they missed submitting this required minor variance.
Thank you, Mr. Harrigan. So, Mr. Lewis, that was part of what I read into the opening remarks today, was that it was the responsibility of the applicant to ensure that he or she has all of the variances that they require for their application. I don't think it's, okay. So to that end, I'd like to ask the panel to accept that we are going to recirculate this application, and regretfully, we have to impose the fee for recirculation. All in favor of recirculation, please raise your hands. The application is required to be recirculated. Please note that Mr. Lewis did not agree with the recirculation or the paying of the fee for the recirculation.
C, all of the above.
All of the above, okay. Moving on to application number 5. This is having to do with 7935 Cooper Hill Road. Christian Piquet, are you available, Mr. Piquet? Mr. Piquet? I don't see him there.
Hello?
Hello, Mr. Piquet.
Hello. Hello.
Hi.
Good morning.
Good morning. I need to administer an oath concerning the sign posting on your property. Can you take that oath today?
Yes, sir.
We're having a tough time with your internet connection. You seem to be frozen, but I'll try and administer the oath. Maybe it'll clear up. You solemnly swear or affirm that the notice provided by the committee was posted at the property to which the application applies for the prescribed number of days before the hearing as instructed and was clearly visible and legible during that time. Do you swear? You're frozen once again. Well, there you are. Here, moving. Would you like me to repeat the oath? Hello, Mr. Piquet. Hello. Do you seem to be moving a little bit better now? Can you hear us? Can't hear? It must be at your end, sir.
Mr. Chair, sorry to interrupt. I'm wondering if he turned off his video, if that would help, possibly.
Mr. Piquet, try turning off your video. Now you're muted. Please unmute yourself so that. Okay. Can you hear us now, Mr. Piquet?
Yes, I can.
Okay, I will try and administer the oath one more time, see if it works. Do you solemnly Hello? Do you solemnly swear or affirm that the notice provided by the committee was posted at the property to which the application applies for the prescribed number of days before the hearing as instructed and was clearly visible and legible during that time? Do you swear?
I can't even hear you.
Okay, I can hear you.
Can I get another computer? Sorry. You can hear me?
Sure, I can hear you. What I think we should do is we can stand you down until you do get a computer. Please let us know by raising your hand that you have a new computer that is you can work with. And we'll come back to you after we finish with the next applications, number 6 and 7. Is that okay?
All right, thank you.
Okay.
Mr. Chair, could I suggest that you give him the phone number, and if he has problems, he can call in?
Can you hear us, Mr. Piquet?
Yes, I can hear you.
Okay. Madam Coordinator, can you provide him with the phone number to be able to access us so he can tell us when he has a new computer?
Yeah, the phone number is on the original Zoom invitation that he has.
Do you have that, Mr. Piquet?
I do have it, yes.
Okay, so
I
please
do have
call
it.
in. Please call in once you're able to.
Obviously now everything works fine.
Okay, then we can move forward now. It seems that everything
We could
seems
try,
fine.
but
Well, let's give it one more shot, okay?
yes, sir.
All right, so do you solemnly swear or affirm that the notice provided by the committee was posted at the property to which the application applies for the prescribed number of days before the hearing as instructed and was clearly visible and legible during that time? You swear?
Yes, Mr. Chair.
Great.
I swear.
Please provide us with a brief description of your application today.
Appeared today in regards to a consent under the infill policy 3.7.29 and 20. I wish to sever 0.8 hectares at the southwest corner of my 9.42 hectare property. I have no intentions of selling this severed lot in the immediate future, but wish to construct a single level, fully accessible residence with an attached barn style garage. The residence is my concern as I was to the area. They are beginning to have health issues, particularly with mobility, and the construction would facilitate their mobility by eliminating stairs, permitting us to assist with their presence and future care and provide other mental health well-being benefits financially. I am extremely nervous. But anyways, so yes, that's why we're here today. And I obviously know that planning has objections, so I believe they might go before me, or did you just want me to continue on?
Well, you can continue on if you have a further explanation about your application. We'll get to planning after you've had the opportunity to briefly describe yours.
Okay, so I originally considered a coach house just to put it on there, but I found the sizing limitation too restricting. After multiple consultation with various parties, I just decided to invest time and money into the severance process after receiving an email from Mr. Krishaw Walker, formerly of planning. Walker was helping me out with my pre-consultation for the coach and believed that we had a good understanding of my proposal. I have had, in my letter that I sent on Monday, I have attached, there's attachment A, which shows an email conversation that I had with him. And he himself suggested I may require minor variance for the MDS, but concluded that it appears my proposal would qualify under the provision of the city's official plan policies, sorry. So to carry on to the planning objections. So they objected for 37219B, which is just the proposed severance is opposite residential lots with a frontage on the same road. So I obviously disagree. I do believe that my property is across from a residential lot. So no one would consider my neighbor's property anything but residential. I can't deny that there's a minor agricultural use on the property, which is primarily located along the western edge of the heavy tree line. But it appears that, so that it appears to be on Circle J's property or in the pasture concealed from public view at the rear of the property. The property owners view it strictly as residential property, and in a letter to the panel advised that the lot was severed from the adjacent Circle J ranch to be a residential lot. So with that, so basically what I'm trying to say is in the future, if they did ever sell, and the only reason why there's even a pasture back there is because the family, their family members or owner Circle J themselves. So in the future, if they did end up selling the property would be strictly residential. And for the objection to 37.919D, the lot created, including the retaining parcel, should be of similar size to existing surrounding lots, but must be at least 0.8 hectares in size. Mr. Harrigan has stated in his response that the intent to infill policy is to ensure severance is, I quote, desirable and good planning practice to fit within the existing surrounding built-up neighborhood and community character. I believe a broader interpretation of existing surrounding lots is appropriate. So by looking at what's on the screen right now, the Geo Ottawa, you can see that at least 6 previous severances in my neighborhood, with several resulting in lots smaller than the 0.8 hectares that I'm requesting. The second lot to the east of my property is only 0.77 hectares. While these severances were more than likely granted under the general provision, they do exist. So I really do not believe I am requesting anything that would have a negative impact on my neighborhood or community character. And the last problem that was given to me or objection was the MDS. So I had a conversation on Monday with Mr. Harrigan. Grateful that he answered my call in return. I'll return my call in a timely manner. I am satisfied with his conclusion, but this problem will be eliminated in the next few months. The livestock barn in question, as noted in the letter from the community to the, as noted to the letter that was sent from property owner Mr. Carmichael, he will be modifying into a garage and shortening it even, which the main reason why he's also looking to be doing this is so that in the future, he is also looking to sever and knows that this barn will actually impede his proposal as well. With that said, I believe I have covered all, and yeah, no, I really want this, please.
Thank you very much, Mr. Piquet. Thanks for struggling through the beginning of this with the technical. So, Mr. Harrigan, I'd like you to ask you to make some comments on behalf of the city, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Through you, the planning department has serious concerns with this application and therefore objects to the application. The reason stated is that the infill policy is meant, and the intent of the policy is meant to be a strict policy that recognizes very specific scenarios where a built-up community or neighborhood or street where it is appropriate for the existing character to have a severance and an infill in there, which is why there are very specific requirements within this policy. For criteria B, the planning department is not fully satisfied that it's fully adhered to. It is across from a property that has a residential dwelling on it, but is not necessarily residential lots in the plural sense, and there are farming practices in there, so it is not strictly residential. The planning department is of the opinion that this is unclear whether his proposal does fully satisfy this specific requirement. The second requirement that we have major concerns with, and is a clear contradiction of the official plan policy, is criteria D. This states that the severed parcels, the retained and severed parcel, have to be of a similar size to the existing surrounding area. This is set in place so that it is, again, this specific criteria is meant to be a strict interpretation that you are of a similar size. The immediate 5 surrounding lots entirely around there are between 10.3 hectares and 22 hectares, roughly, approximately. That is not within the appropriate size. It is not within the existing neighborhood character. I understand that there are smaller lots farther down the size, but that doesn't represent a build-up neighborhood as this policy is meant to be interpreted through. The final policy that we object to is the minimum distance separation. So through the provincial policy statement, any severances are to abide by the minimum distance separation formula that have been developed by the Ontario Ministry of Agriculture, Food and Rural Affairs. They have developed formulas and calculations, and they have determined that the unoccupied barn on the neighboring property, the required setback that is required is 165 meters, where the edge of the proposed severance is only setback 91 meters. I understand that the owner of the barn does have future plans to maybe modify it or remove the barn. However, this is not a guaranteed. He can change his plans. There is no condition that we can impose on the neighboring property or the neighboring owner to force him to remove this barn. And as such, we have to treat it under the current conditions and the current policies and the current rules. And therefore, we will have to object to this application.
Thank you, Mr. Harrigan. I'd like to ask the panel now for some questions or comments. Mr. Lewis, any questions or comments? You're muted, sir.
No questions at this time.
Thank you. Mr. Otto?
Just, I guess, a question for probably the planner. The horse operation across the road from Mr. Piquet, I just did a thumb sketch on it on the diagrams, and it appears to me to be closer than the one that you're concerned about, but it's not mentioned.
Mr. Harrigan, do you have any comments about that?
Through you, Mr. Chair, that is correct. So based on the calculation formulas, the the stables are closer than the unoccupied barn, but has a less setback required. And this is due to the fact that the unoccupied barn, it is unsure what animals could be brought into there. So if the current owner decides to change his plans and sell his land, or under circumstances wants to resume livestock operations, it is not limited to, say, horses. He can go in there as long as he follows the correct legislation and bring in different animals or that may produce a greater setback. And as a result, the formula and calculations established by the province has stated that it needs to have a greater setback.
Thank you. Any further, Mr. Otto?
Well, yeah, it doesn't seem to make sense to me because the people across the road could also do this exactly the same thing. They could change their operation to a dairy farm or a hog farm or whatever you wanted to call it. But yet there's some inconsistency. And I do believe that the use of the horse farm on Mr. Carmichael's property was set up for horses. So I understand the situation, and I believe we have to stick to the minimum distance, but there seems to be a lot of inconsistency.
Thank you. Mr. Vervoort, any comments?
Just a couple of questions for planning. So in the previous, have you spoken to Mr. Walker, Mr. Harrington, about the pre-consultation?
Through you, Mr. Chair, I have consulted with Mr. Walker, and his initial email said that there may be an opportunity to apply under this policy, not necessarily that it would abide by this policy. And I would also like to remind the applicant that those initial consultations are a preliminary review. During the inquiry phase and the emails that go back and forth, the planning department does not have the resources to conduct a full comprehensive review that we would undertake with a formal application submission.
Okay, and then my second question is with respect to the MDS. I guess based on the current separation requirement, I don't see a minor variance application that would try and address that issue. But I guess the question is, could a condition be imposed that the applicant, prior to finalizing the severance, would have to confirm that provide confirmation that the neighboring barn is no longer used for livestock purposes or has been converted to another use?
Harrigan.
Through you, Mr. Chair, there can't be a condition that can be applied for that. You are correct that there are no minor variances to that. But as of right now, the barn is a standing structure and it does have the capacity to resume livestock operations. No condition can be imposed on the neighboring lot. So as such, there's nothing that we can address that with.
Okay, thank you. Those are my questions.
Thank you. Ms. Chandler, any questions or comments?
Was that me? Sorry.
No, Ms. Chandler.
Oh, sorry.
What's your official plan designation over this property and that across the street?
Mr. Harrigan.
Through you, Mr. Chair, it is the general rural area, which does permit livestock and farming operations as well as single detached dwellings.
Okay, well, MDS aside, I have lots of sympathy for wanting to accommodate parents aging. However, as far as the planning policy goes in the OP, I have to agree with planning staff. These policies were set very specifically to address a circumstance where I think the expression is the missing board in the fence, or the missing tooth in the smile, and not to accommodate additional rural severances for which we have pretty strict policies about. So unfortunately, regardless of the MDS question and the horses and that sort of thing, it would be extremely difficult for me to support the severance.
Thank you, Ms. Chandler. Me personally, I sympathize with Mr. Paquette. Looking at the development on the street, there are many that are many lots that have been created that are substantially smaller than his. And with respect to the MDS, I'm sure that Mr. Carmichael is an honest man. He wouldn't write a letter to you and trying to make it sound like he's going to do something and not do it. He wouldn't sign his name to that, I don't think. So to that end, I think I would support this application. That would be my position in any event. So I'd like to, yes, Mr. Lewis.
I was just reading through the department's conditions. Supposing we did want to support this, quite a lengthy list of conditions. Has the applicant seen that?
Yeah, I am perfectly happy. I will take care of all of it.
Good. Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. So you have seen the conditions, Mr. Piquet, and you're comfortable?
Yes, yes, I received them yesterday and went through them all, and there shouldn't be any problems.
Okay, thank you.
I'm just wondering, are we seeing the same list though?
I don't trust my computer to go to my emails right now.
Okay, so we'll have Mr. Harrigan go through the list of conditions then for you so that you're aware of them and the commits written into the record then.
Yeah.
Mr. Harrigan?
Yes, through you, Mr. Chair. Would you like me to read them verbatim, or would you like me to give you a summary of each condition?
Yeah, give us a summary, and then if Mr. Piquet has any issues with any particular one, he can raise his hand and you can further explain.
Absolutely. So the first condition just returns, is not necessarily a condition, but it's a comment by Building Code Services, just to let them know that the new lot lines created may not abide by the Ontario Building Code, and as such, the Building Code Service Department will have to receive calculations by a qualified designer to ensure that the ministry qualifications specifying spatial separation requirements are adhered to, and that's just in terms of the Building Code of Ontario. The second one is just to ensure that the owner has provided proof that cash in lieu of the conveyance of land for parkland has been provided. The third condition is that road widening is provided from 13 meters from the center line of Cooper Hill, or to ensure that that road widening has already been satisfied for the retained and severed land. My apologies. The fourth one is just to ensure that notice registered on title that the city does not guarantee the quality or quantity of groundwater. The fifth one is to ensure that they complete a hydrogeological assessment and terrain analysis up to our standards, just ensuring that the technical guidelines for ensuring sewage systems and for groundwater on private wells is adhered to. And then there's an additional condition, just that the owner does receive, or ensures that the MDS is adhered to, or that they receive a minor variance that will allow the MDS to be adhered to.
Mr. Piquet, are you in agreement with all those conditions?
Yes, I am in agreement.
Thank you very much. To that end, I'd like to ask the panel for approval of this application. All those in favor, please raise your hands. All those, did you raise your hand, Mr. Otto? So please raise your hands, all in favor of this application. All those opposed? Your application is approved, Mr. Piquet. Thank you very much. Now we'll move on to application numbers 6 and 7. Having to do with 4639 Donnelly Drive. Mr. Shipman, are you available? Please, there you go. Hello, Mr. Shipman.
Hello.
I need to administer the oath for the sign posting. Do you solemnly swear or affirm that the notice provided by the committee was posted at the property to which the application applies for the prescribed number of days before the hearing as instructed and was clearly visible and legible during that time? Do you swear?
I do.
Please proceed and provide a brief description of your applications today.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm wondering if the coordinator could bring up the sketch that was submitted with the application. I don't know if that's available. I might be helpful. In any event, there we go. As you can see, it's the subject land is a large parcel, roughly 34 hectares in size. The vast majority of the retained lands, or the proposed retained lands, is covered with a solar farm, which represents about 2/3 to 3/4 of the property is cleared and developed with the solar farm. The purpose of the subject application is to separate the solar farm from the residential property itself. As mentioned, the property is largely cleared and developed. There'd be no new development proposed as part of this application. Due to the long-term lease and the use of the retained parcel, there is no plans to develop a residential dwelling on there anytime in the foreseeable future. I expect that lease for the solar farm extends 20 years and likely beyond because of the nature of the development. Planning has raised the concern as we just went through it at the outset of the hearing, so I won't belabor that other than to note that the site is vast. There's plenty of opportunity for a building envelope well outside of the potential 500-meter influence zone relative to any landfill that may be there. In the other respects, there's a great deal of relief from the developable area on this land down to that site, some 12 to 14 meters of drop there, which is why there was some concern in relation to unstable slopes. So essentially, I believe we have the two outstanding issues: the unstable slopes, which we had formally addressed by way of either a development agreement or a holding zone. I believe probably we're looking at a holding zone on the retained parcel here as the best approach. It's our position that the holding zone on the retained parcel could also adequately address any concerns in relation to the potential landfill across the road. Again, we have reviewed that site across the road. It's a vacant property, about 30 hectares in size, owned together with the former correctional facility. It has been largely, well, it has been untouched since as far back as we have imagery to 76, other than that small area identified to you both from street view and the overhead view that appears to indicate material being removed, not material being brought in. I've looked very closely at it year over year over year and can't imagine where this unknown designation that's not available to us, and the information is not available to us about potential landfill. I do note that the correctional facility itself was torn down somewhere between 2012, 2014, I believe. And there's certainly no indication in the imagery of any material being transported across the road and backfilled in that site. So I would stress again that this landfill potential has to be very, very minimal, and the site certainly is not a landfill in general. Anybody can look at that and see it. It's wetlands and that type of thing. Given the vast area available on a retained parcel, the nature of the use of the retained parcel, and the separation both vertically and horizontally from any potential concerns related to landfill on the correctional facility lands across the road, we feel that a holding zone locking up the retained parcel for potential residential development until sometime in the future, likely to be beyond 20 years, if the solar array ever is removed, is an appropriate way to address it. The applicant has had a look at the hefty cost of placing the holding zone, removing the holding zone, doing the studies, this type of thing, and sees this as really the only approach to accomplish their goals. Just one last comment with respect to that landfill. I said that in quotation marks across the road, or potential landfill. We don't believe there is any landfill there. I think, if we had to provide some sort of study in relation to that land, it would be a sort of a death knell for this application. I just don't know how we would. It's abandoned or unused Crown land related to that correctional facility. I don't know how we would go about dealing with that, or the absence of any. It's hard to prove a sort of a negative, if you know what I mean. With that, I think I probably present you with enough information. Up to the committee's discretion. I realized that there would be groundwater study requirements. Leaving it to your discretion. That can either be done as a condition now or left to be part of the holding zone requirements as well, since there is going to be no residential development of the retained parcel. The holding zone on there would be holding zone for residential development would be very appropriate, I think.
Thank you, Mr. Shipman. Mr. Gordon, do you have any comments on the city's behalf?
Yes, through you, Mr. Chair, the site across the street is less than 100 meters away and identified on Geo-Ottawa as a former landfill site. And as per the OP policies, there is the requirement for that risk assessment, which a risk assessment considers both the hydrology and some aspects of a phase 1 environmental assessment to determine if there is risk. Anything other than that at this point is speculation. We hope there's not a lot of risk, but we don't know.
Okay. Does our conservation partners have any comments to make? No? Okay. Thank you very much. I'd like to ask the panel if they have any questions or comments. Ms. Chandler?
The trigger for the EIS, is there a graphic showing the extent of the natural feature that's triggering that?
Mr. Shipman, do you know if there is one there?
Certainly, I don't have one. If you brought up my sketch again, I could. It probably would prove quite helpful. I guess there. I guess that'll do. So the property's been largely cleared. The trigger for the EIS, I presume, would be there is some bush left down in here that is more or less attached to a large area of contiguous bush that's represented as a natural heritage feature in the official plan schedule. I forget what schedule it is. As you probably know, we have submitted an EIS with the application, which addresses any concerns and talks about a potential building envelope up in the closer to the front of the property, some at the top of back in the flat. But it certainly could be. I'm sure when you reviewing the EIS. This vast area in here is all cleared. So a house could go anywhere back in here if the solar array was no longer there.
Anything further, Ms. Chandler?
I'm struggling a little bit with this one because there's just sort of a whole bunch of pieces that feel risky in terms of what would normally be the expectation to support severance, but on the other hand, all of them seem somewhat remote in terms of the not actually being able to find a developable envelope on the property ultimately in the end. So I think from that perspective, I'm going to be comfortable with the application subject to the holding zone and conditions related to those outstanding studies.
Okay. Mr. Lewis, any comments?
Well, see, my thoughts are nothing's going to change there, so I don't see any problem. Obviously, the owner either wants to get rid of the house or get rid of the solar panel, separate the two, or one thing or another. But if we can do it through a rezoning or a holding zone, what's the difference between a rezoning, nothing's to be built there? Is that a more expensive way to go? Or can that even be done?
Mr. Shipman?
Rezone the property as whatever it is.
Subject to, of course, Mr. Gordon's comments, I believe the holding zone, it's essentially the same process as a rezoning. It just indicates that, I mean, it could be rezoned permanently not to allow residential development, but I don't think that's necessary. A holding zone just maintains the same zoning with a flag on it saying no residential development unless such conditions are met. And of course, it would be easier at some point in the future to address those concerns and put it back to allow residential development at some point in the future. So our feeling is that a holding zone is more appropriate.
Yeah, I get that. My thoughts are rezoning is more appropriate, but either way, I'm satisfied with that, because let's face it, I'm surprised this didn't have to be done at the time the solar panel was built. I can't understand how it was allowed to be built as part of a residence and wasn't made to be rezoned at that point. I almost wonder if somebody didn't slip up. Thank you.
You're welcome. Mr. Otto, any comments?
I guess I got a comment or a question, and it's sort of around what Mr. Lewis just said. Is this a microfit program, or is it a larger, I forget the name of it, for the larger solar programs, which had a 20-year contract, I believe. But certain places, when there's solar panels put on, they either rezone it to industrial or commercial. Would that possibly happen if they do sever the house off?
Who are you asking?
I guess planning would be the people to ask.
Mr. Gordon?
Through you, Mr. Chair, we did have discussions internally in the department, and the solar panels are permitted as a standalone use on the lot with the current zoning.
Okay, thank you. Anything further, Mr. Otto?
I believe he's correct, but I'm wondering if the house is severed off, does that change that policy or that statement?
Mr. Gordon?
That is the context in which we had the conversation. It can be a standalone use. It does not have to be secondary to the house.
Okay. Mr. Otto?
All right, well, I'd be in favor of it by probably putting on a holding zone on the retained portion.
Thank you. Mr. Vervoort?
I agree with Mr. Otto's comments. I think by putting a holding zone on there, it addresses all the issues if there is any further development on the land, and allows the severance of the existing residents, which has probably been there for a long time. So I'm fine as long as those conditions are imposed.
Thank you. Mr. Gordon, I just want to be clear on the number of conditions, because we received something last night. We received something this morning. I just want to make sure that Mr. Shipman and the applicant understand fully the conditions involved. Can you please go through them for us?
Yes. So the first is that the owner enter into an agreement with the city, putting a notice on title relating to groundwater quality and quantity. The second is the road widening requirement. third is that a geotechnical report be provided that addresses the potentially unstable slopes on both the severed and retained parcel. And the fourth is that the risk assessment be provided to do with the former waste disposal site across the road.
And I believe the fifth now is a 30-meter holdings setback, 30 centimeter, excuse me, 30 centimeter for line for a holding zone. Is that correct?
I'm not aware of such condition. We did discuss a holding zone at one point, but it was determined it would not be appropriate as that would deny access to the site, which is required for the continued solar operation.
I'm confused then because we had a holding zone requirement that our condition that 3 or 4 of our panel members were discussing along with Mr. Shipman. Can Mr. Shipman please enlighten us a little bit?
Yes, if I may, I think we're confusing the requirement for a reserve with the holding zone designation. There's not been suggestion of a reserve like we do for the retained parcel, because that would deny access to the parcel and inhibit the solar array use. The holding zone would put in place conditions for the various concerns vis-a-vis unstable slopes, this type of thing. A holding zone on the retained parcel would do that. There, in respect to the severed lot, I don't believe there's any requirement condition for unstable slopes or anything. The building has been there. It's been there for 100 years. Nothing's changing in respect to the existing dwelling.
Okay, so you're happy with those conditions, Mr. Shipman?
Well, the last conditions in respect to the risk assessment and the geotechnical study would be imposed vis-a-vis the holding zone, not as a condition of approval of the severance. The condition would be the holding zone, rezoning for a holding zone.
Mr. Gordon, are you okay with that?
Yes.
Okay, great. So I would now like to ask the panel for approval of this application with those conditions involved. Yes, Ms. Chandler.
I just want to double down on that confirmation. Mr. Gordon indicated that there would be an issue with the holding zone with respect to the use of the property. Now, I understand about the 30 centimeter reserve, but could Mr. Gordon confirm that placing a holding zone on the property tied to certain conditions should residential development be proposed in the future? Is that going to work? Is that acceptable from a planning perspective? Like, can that be implemented, or is it actually going to hinder the property in the future?
I'm not sure I fully understood that question, but I'll try and answer it. And if I don't cover it, please seek clarification. The 30 centimeter reserve and the holding zone are two separate items. So the 30 centimeter reserve would deny access, which would cause an issue for the existing and continued use of the site as a solar farm. The holding zone would just permit or prevent the building of a house or well until such time that the studies have been provided to lift that holding zone.
Okay, that's what I hoped that we were hearing. I just wanted to confirm that. Okay, I don't have anything further. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Revort, do you have a comment?
Yeah, I think just to clarify this then, like, I don't think we're talking about a 30 centimeter reserve at all. And to me, the only conditions would be the standard agreement regarding quality and quantity of groundwater, road widening, and a holding zone which with such conditions as reasonably required by planning and development.
Okay, Mr. Shipman, you agree with that?
Mr. Shipman and Mr. Gordon?
Yes, following on what Mr. Vervoort said, that seems entirely appropriate to me, his take on it, yeah.
Mr. Gordon, do you agree?
Yes.
So to that end, I'd like to ask the panel for approval of this application with the conditions suggested by Mr. Vervoort. All those in favor, please raise your hands. Applications are approved. Thank you very much, Mr. Shipman.
Thank you.
The big one.
Now we're on to application number 8, having to do with 6301 Ottawa Street West. Mr. Oxtoby, or Ms. Oxtoby, I'm not sure which one it is. Mr. Oxtoby, are you available, sir? You need to unmute. There you go. Good morning.
Good morning, Mr. Chair.
I'd like to administer an oath concerning the signposting. Can you do that today?
Yes.
Do you solemnly swear or affirm that the notice provided by the committee was posted at the property to which the application applies for the prescribed number of days before the hearing as instructed and was clearly visible and legible during that time?
I do so swear.
Thank you very much. Please proceed and provide us with a brief description of your application today.
At this time, we are proposing to build a 1-story, 3-season porch at the rear of our home. As the porch is designed currently, we require a minor variance to the rear yard setback, reducing the current 9-meter setback to a setback of 5.28 meters.
Okay, thank you very much, sir. Now I'd like to ask Mr. Harrigan for his comments on this application.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Through you, the planning department has no concerns with this application. We are satisfied that the 4 tests are met. But in my previous conversations with the applicant, he has inquired about the limiting distance comment that was provided by Building Code Services. And I have just received confirmation from them and would like to elaborate on it. The limiting distance is a condition, not a condition, sorry, it is a requirement by the Ontario Building Code that requires separation between 2 adjacent properties and structures for fire safety. The amount of windows, the percentage of a wall that is encompassed of windows dictates the required setback. So that will have to be registered on title, and that is a requirement by Building Code Services and the Ontario Building Code. But I just want to clarify that for the applicant.
Thank you very much, Mr. Harrigan. Is that okay, Mr. Oxtoby?
Yes.
Okay, good. So I'd like to ask the panel for any questions or comments. Mr. Lewis?
No comments, questions, support. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Otto?
No comments and I support it.
Ms. Chandler?
I have no concerns.
Thank you. Mr. Vervoort?
Just clarification. So are you saying, Mr. Harrigan, that something has to be registered on title regarding limiting distance separation?
For my conversations with the Building Code Services Department, that is correct.
Like, to me, like, we don't normally condition minor variances, and this is a building permit issue, not a minor variance issue.
Through you, Mr. Chair, this is not a condition for the minor variance. This is a requirement by the Ontario Building Code.
Oh, okay, so it'll be part of the permit process. So, okay, that's fine. That was my understanding. I just wanted clarification. Thank you.
Thank you.
I'm fine with the application.
Thank you very much. Mr. Otto, did you already have your chance? Yeah, okay. So to that end, I'd like to ask the panel for approval of this application. All those in favor, please raise your hands. I don't see Ms. Chandler. Good, I see you now. Thank you very much. Your application is approved, Mr. Oxtoby, and I don't believe there is any further business for the committee today, so I'd like to adjourn this meeting. Thank you, everyone, for your participation. Have a great rest of the week.